What was the most awkward thing you witnessed in a school classroom? Not safe for work. Story 1. I was swimming in our school's pool and cut my foot pretty badly on the diving board. I didn't notice it was bleeding until I got out and walked over to the diving board again, leaving little blood spots wherever my foot touched. The teacher stopped everyone and made us all hold still while he searched out who was getting blood all over. With the pool area in dead silence, he followed it over to me, who had just noticed it and had realized that this was coming from my foot, and said loudly, "Waddick, if you're gonna menstruate in my class, would you please have the decency to plug it up?" Like some sort of wannabe comedian who was modeling a style of humor after the Carrie movie. I got tampons thrown at me for 2 years at that school, and pads constantly stuck to my locker, all clean except for one, inexplicably. Story 2. Back in the 6th grade, I had a kid who would always cause trouble and tried to be the center of attention all the time. Well, this kid had a weird way of flirting with girls, whether it would be to shoot spitballs at them or pour water onto them. One day, he told all his friends that he will literally shit his pants during class in order to show off to the girls. During class, we can hear giggling, and it began to smell like actual shit. Everyone looked at him because he was sitting in the back of the class, and he stands up while laughing and says, "Teacher, I need to go to the bathroom, I accidentally shit my pants," with shit running down his legs as he walks out of the class, laughing hysterically, as if he just won the Nobel Prize or something. By the way, he was never popular with the girls. I don't understand. How could this fail? Story 3. In 2nd grade of high school, a student flipped the F off and started throwing chairs and his desk at the teacher because he was refused a test reprisal upon failing it the first time. Shit got super scary. He was yelling like crazy, and the female teacher was trying to protect herself from the things thrown at her. Another teacher next door barged in, grabbed the enraged student, nailed him onto the floor face down, and tied his feet and arms together with his belt and shoelace. I remember him being taken away and we never saw him again. I think the teachers ate him. Story 4. In my high school economics class, a girl was called to the office with her things rather suddenly. About 2 minutes later, she comes bursting into the room and yells, "My dad just died." The teacher immediately went to her to try and console her as she was justifiably distressed. Everyone in the room was in complete shock. She then yelled at the teacher to get off of her, and she threw her arm back and almost hysterically darted around the room. Eventually, her family members came to the room and got her. We could hear her sobbing down the hall. It was one of the craziest and most heart-wrenching things I had ever seen in the class. The second most awkward thing involved the same girl about a year earlier. She nearly tried to fight our English literature teacher while he was dressed in a formal kilt and jacket. I don't remember why. She had to be escorted out by security. Story 5. So part of my job at the time had me meeting with teachers and schools to discuss alternative programs for the students. One of the teachers had been working there for 20 plus years. She had job security and would tell exactly what she thought. It leads to some awkward exchanges when discussing students. Things like, "Oh, he's crazier than a shithouse rat. You don't want him in a place without heavy security." The most awkward, however, was when she said, "She really gets around for a girl with one arm, like a slot machine that pays out in blood." Story 6. This mentally handicapped kid in my class named Mark was always super infatuated with this really smart nice girl in our class. He would always talk about how he was going to make her his girlfriend, and she was always just too nice to him to tell if it was going to happen. This went on for years. Anyways, one day, someone thought it would be funny to tell Mark I was dating the love of his life. I wasn't. Mark flipped his shit and found me in the hallway and pushed me up against this giant topographical plaster map of Alberta. The Rocky Mountains cut into my back as he pushed me harder into it and yelled into my face while crying about how Tessa was his girlfriend and I need to leave her alone. I told him I wasn't dating her and he ran off crying. Poor guy. Story 7. I had an English teacher who was admittedly a fat kid back in his high school days. He had a certain swagger/inexplicably mean and attention-seeking way about him that told us every day was a chance to act out his mean girl fantasies that he couldn't achieve as a once-bullied 240 shorty. He lost all his weight and was now a tall, lean dude. He even took up hip-hop classes and would sometimes bust out moves just for the class. I fucking hated this guy. One day, he strode up to a girl in our class who was devastatingly beautiful, but was also a pretty kick-ass girl power kind of chick. She was doodling while he was lecturing, so he picked up her pencil bag, she was artistic and her bag was full of supplies, and dumped it onto the ground smirking. This badass bitch looks him dead in the eye and says, Pick it up. He scoffs. No. She goes, that was completely inappropriate. Pick it up or I'm going straight to the principal and explaining how you just dumped my personal belongings onto the ground and tried to humiliate me. The class was dead silent watching this, and after a few more tense moments, he slowly bends down and picks everything up. It took him a while, and it was the most cringy, most awkward thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Story 8. I was in the 9th grade and there was a girl in my classroom who broke both of her arms, so she had them in the cast that held her arms above her waist. Now, this girl wasn't exactly the most popular, as she was the best friend with another girl who was equally as awkward as she was. I will never forget when my best friend raised her hand to get the attention of the teacher. The teacher called on the best friend and she asked if she and her broken-armed friend could use the restroom together. And the teacher asks, why would you need to go together? She replies, I have to unzip and take off her pants. Looking back, I can understand that she just wanted to help her friend use the restroom, but imagine being in the 9th grade and you hear this. Everyone in the classroom was silent and then one kid just started laughing. Then everyone started laughing, and that is how the lesbian rumors started about these two. High school can be a bit. Story 9. I was in the 9th grade, so 14/15 years old at the time. We were having a sex education class and a big group of us. We were given a bunch of sex words on paper, like veg sex, oral sex, kissing, and stuff like that. I got We had to line up in order from least likely to spread diseases to most likely. Well, I had so I stood at the end where I was least likely to transmit a disease to someone. When we were done, the teacher looked at it and asked me, is it with just yourself or others? Well, I only by myself, so it's just with myself. The laughter was awful. The moment I said it, I could see the regret on the teacher's face for making an already awkward boy even more awkward. Story 10. I used to substitute teach after college. A quick realization that I wasn't cut out for elementary-aged children, or kids in general, happened one day while subbing for a kindergarten class. After lunch, the kids are crazy with energy. I see one boy tugging on another boy's arm in a romantic way, trying to pull the boy under a table. I approach to separate the two when I turn around and see the two boys exposing themselves to a little girl underneath the table across the room. I freak out and scream, "Whoa! Stop! Everybody stop!" Silence in the room, except for the arm tugger boy who was now climbing on top of his buddy he pulled underneath the table and is caressing the face of said victim. I called the principal down to deal with everything, and a little girl urinates herself from her desk out of fear of the principal and counselors being in the room. This was my last day ever substitute teaching. Story 11. I was on the first day of PE class with a classically intense coach. He bounced students out of the first week with ease. This one kid didn't follow his instructions, so he told them to get out. The kid remains silent and doesn't budge. The teacher comes up and starts yelling at him to leave. The kid walks up in his face and doesn't move. The entire class is watching, just wondering if this is how we all die. Eventually, he walked out, but it was uncomfortable as fuck. What? The story wasn't good enough? Okay, fine. Here's the alternative ending. Then the kid exploded into moths and swarmed all the light sources, inducing total blackness. We all ran, and to this day that classroom is quarantined because it's still black with moths. I hope this makes it up to all of you who expected something crazier to go down. Story 12. In 7th grade, there was a girl that was known for doing all kinds of weird shit. She cut a chunk of her hair off and left it on my friend's desk as a birthday present, meowed at people, and cried when anyone stepped on a bug. The most awkward incident happened when she dropped her pencil during a test. I guess she was too shy to ask the person next to her for it, so she tried to stretch for it and ended up flipping her desk over. She then continued to do her test with her desk sideways for another 10 minutes, while the teacher told another student to flip her over. Story 13. There was this couple in my math class who had broken up. The guy sat behind the girl for the rest of the year. One day, John goes to the washroom, and while he is out, some guy who sits close to him opens his bag and quietly starts pulling out his contents and very quietly placing them on his desk. There are the usual things, and then there's a bottle of hand lotion, some 8x10 glossies of his ex, and some other pictures of her. Those get piled onto the desk too. John returns, sees the items on the desk, and loses his mind, starts swearing. And now everyone is looking over, including his ex, who says, "What the fuck? I thought you said you gave all those back." Everyone sees what she's looking at. It was very uncomfortable. Story 14. We had one of those strange/quiet kids at school that everyone would verbally abuse. One day he showed up with 4 long scratch marks on the side of his face. These were pretty raw and were scabbing up. The kids were making fun of him. "Hey Matt, did you have a rough date last night? Hey Matt, you're supposed to jack off to your dick, not your head." This went on for a couple of days. Then we find out the kid had taken a butcher knife to his piano teacher during a lesson and chopped the hell out of her. They found her body on the floor of the kitchen, nude and mutilated. A bottle of wine and 2 wine glasses are on the counter. He came to school for 2 days afterward while she lay on the floor rotting. She had been sexually abusing him for weeks and he finally snapped. Poor kid. He got off on self-defense and he and his family went underground after that. Name change and everything. Story 15. We had a math teacher that was a bit effeminate, so naturally students spread the rumors that he was gay. He had some of those really long rulers in the class, and one day a ruler toppled over neatly into the crack of his ass as he was leaning down to help a student. He let out a surprised "ooh" sound. We all laughed, and the poor guy was subjected to even more rumors and jokes. We also had a substitute teacher who we referred to as Pierce Brosnan. He looked like the actor, but with a huge scar on his face. He was notoriously known for smelling like chicken tikka. Kids in the class would drive him batshit crazy to the point where he'd slam his hands on the desk and yell "shut up" at the top of his lungs. Of course, this only encouraged kids to tease him more. Oh, another one. We had this really awesome French teacher. He'd bring in French candy, tell us stories about how when he was young, and all around was just a great teacher, aside from his temper. There was this bad of a kid in my class who would wind up the class. One day our teacher had enough of it. He threw his whiteboard pen at the floor as hard as he could, slowly walked up to the kid maintaining eye contact the entire time, and verbally tore him to shreds. The kid was crying and red-faced, complete with snot trails, as he was sent out of the room. Nobody dared breathe as our teacher slowly walked towards the pen he had thrown. He picked it up and casually said, "Oops, I broke the pen." The class giggled, but those were some intense minutes. Story 16. I went to school with this kid. I think his name was Matt. Matt was in a wheelchair, but he was a fucking dickhead. He used to sing and sink in the hallway and run into girls with his wheelchair. You could tell he was socially fucked up from being the wheelchair kid, but you could also tell that he knew how to play the wheelchair card like a champ. Eventually, the school started giving him punishments for being such a douchebag. So I'm in the in-school suspension room, and it's fucking packed because the in-school suspension is awesome, and there was a substitute that day. Matt's in there too, and he was being a dick, but then quieted down. So I'm sitting there, probably a little stoned, and I see Matt start rolling toward the door super slowly. I look over at a teacher, and she has her head down, probably doing a little self-loathing, because who the fuck wants to be the in-school suspension teacher? And so I looked back, and he keeps rolling closer and closer to the door. I give him the look. I co-sign this shit. He grabs the handle, and that's when the teacher looks up. He fucking bolted out of the room. The teacher yells, runs out into the hallway, and he's nowhere to be found. She gets on the phone and tells whoever that Matt just rolled out of the classroom. It was pretty awkward letting a kid in a wheelchair escape from the room. Story 17. I took JROTC, Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, in high school, instead of High School 101, so my instructor was responsible for sex education with us. On the first day of sex ed, as a way to break the ice, he had us write down every slang term for sex or sexual things. Then he read them all aloud to us. I will never forget listening to a 50-plus-year-old Marine talk about pounding the paternal piston. Story 18. Freshman year of high school circa 1990. We had a new history teacher fresh out of college, and he quickly gained a reputation for being a pushover. He was also notorious for never looking at the class. If this kid was reading to us from a book, we might as well have all been smoking meth or something for all he knew. My class decided to do a cattle drive where we would all slowly scoot our desks toward him. Being the deviants that we were, we chose the day where he was being evaluated by the principal to do this. It didn't take long before we were finally at his feet. Some of the students even went past him and had their desks at the chalkboard. He never looked up from that book. The principal was not amused. She took him out in the hallway and chewed him out so loud the entire school heard. He came back into the classroom, looked at this carnage that we had created, loosened his tie, and laughed. Then he sat down at his desk and smoked a cigarette. He was fired at the end of the year. Story 19. This was in middle school. The bell went off to go to our next class, and I noticed a girl had blood on her light-colored blue jeans. Even with me being the kind of boy that no girl would ever talk to if she wanted to keep what little status she might have had with other girls in the school, I took the risk that might come with having a conversation with the girl. I quickly walked right behind her, like creeper close, and put my hands on her shoulder to get her to slow down a little, and I leaned in and whispered into her ear, "You have blood on your pants. I will follow you to the girls' restroom. Just act normal," and took my hands off her shoulder. She never looked back, she didn't say a word, and we walked nearly bumper to bumper to the girls' bathroom. I kept on walking past and off to my next class. I never spoke to her again. I don't remember her face or her name anymore, but I wonder sometimes if I had crossed the line between creeper and kindness. Story 20. One time, one of my friends was emptying out his backpack on his desk looking for his phone, when the teacher noticed he had Midol, period relief medication, in his bag. The teacher asked him why he had it and that he said it was for headaches, not knowing its main purpose. Everyone in the class, including the teacher, burst out laughing and quickly told him what it was really for. It was really only awkward for him, but I guess it was funny as hell. Also, I talked to him later, and he said the real reason he had it was because he had a drug test coming up and he smoked pot a week before, and he read that Midol could cleanse your system to pass the test. Obviously, he didn't want to tell the teacher this, so he said it was for headaches, lol. Edit. So apparently it's actually good for headaches, but I'm pretty sure he had no clue. Also, the teacher really hated this kid, rightfully so. Also, this wasn't the first time he'd been the center of attention either, so he was used to it. Story 21. I remember a substitute teacher that we had for a few days when I was in middle school. She was pretty overweight, and one day she grabbed a chair from an empty desk to help someone out with their assignment when suddenly we heard a loud crash. One of the legs of the chair had broken, and she was flat on her back. It was hard not to laugh, but what made it even worse was that as she was getting up, she ended up farting very loudly. The entire class erupted in a fit of laughter, and she had to leave the classroom because she was so embarrassed. Story 22. In high school, there was a science teacher that was a real fuckwad. I had him once as a substitute the previous semester, and I prayed I never got him. The following semester, I end up getting this guy, and we had a project that's due in a week. His deal is that you have 3 days after the date to hand it in. If you do not, you fail the semester. I fall heavily ill the last week and missed handing it in and barely making it to school to hand it in on the 3rd day. I approach him and he yells at the top of his lungs, "I don't have time for this, goodbye," and slams the door in my face. The following week, I'm sitting in the cafeteria with a few friends discussing teachers, and I'm reminded how I have this guy's class today. I start going full Nazi, explaining how I hope this cocksucker chokes on dick and dies to my fellow juniors. 2 minutes later, there's an announcement telling everyone that he died last night. Awkwardness ensues. Story 23. My school was going through a pantsing epidemic. It means pulling down a person's trousers and/or underwear against their wishes. On one particular day, we had just finished a particularly vicious game of rugby during our PE class. My friend was tackled with the force of a 6-foot, 14-year-old juggernaut, who had a tendency to grab the back of your shorts and yank them high into the pooper. A reverse pantsing wedgie, if you will. After the game, my friend realized that his boxers were bloody and poopy, so he chose not to wear them, and just put his trousers back on. We were in math class later that day, and he was called right into the front of the class to write something on the board. The teacher left the room for a moment when disaster struck, and to the surprise of no one, another kid solid snaked his way into the board and yanked my friend's trousers down to his ankles, butt-ass naked. His immediate response is to turn to face the class, his little bishop in a turtleneck staring everyone down. Immediately followed by a wad of poopy, bloody tissue falling out from his butt cracks, like a makeshift tampon for a brutal rugby butt rape. Then our teacher comes back, who safely assumes this guy is making some sort of statement to the class and sent him to the principal to be punished.